In the heyday of empire, 12,000 British troops invaded the Zulu nation. The British were anxious to develop southern Africa. The Zulus were in the way. A short, cheap war was the answer. At the Battle of Rorke's Drift, British bullishness seemed justified. Here, thousands of Africans were held at bay by a small band of British soldiers who, as a result, were immortalized in painting, poetry, and film. Much less is said of the battle that immediately preceded it. This is Isandhlwana. Here on the 21st of January 1879, the unthinkable happened. A Zulu army wiped out an entire British force in a battle the British had always expected to win. Move! The British were not just outnumbered that day, they were outsmarted.
I think that there's a psychology which pervades the British, which resulted in this catastrophe. And it manifests itself in a complacency, in an underestimation of the enemy, attributing them with little more than being brave savages.
The British force, under the command of Lord Chelmsford, a friend of Queen Victoria, was heading for the Zulu capital. Chelmsford decided to set up camp for one night at the foot of Isandhlwana. So unconcerned was Chelmsford about the Zulu threat that he failed to take even the most elementary precautions.
Chelmsford failed to entrench the camp. He did not dig a peripheral trench around the borders of that camp. Now this was a stipulation in the general orders, and by not doing so, he effectively disobeyed the standing instruction. Chelmsford was to be flayed in history for not entrenching this camp. He fails to draw his wagons into a defensive arrangement, a lager. Chelmsford was to be crucified in history for not lagering.
This is a contemporary cartoon. There's a certain arrogance, being superior, very professional army, well trained. And how could this possibly have happened against the British in a campaign such as this was absolutely inexplicable.
The British soldiers who invaded Zululand knew themselves to be the most powerful fighting force in the world.
The British Army, really from top to bottom, from Lord Chelmsford down to the ordinary soldier, had an innate belief in their own superiority. They felt that their white skins and their discipline and their technological superiority actually made them pretty much superior to anybody.
Of course, because the reality is that they were by far better armed than the Zulus. In any case, you might say it's an element of racism, but still, this was just a bunch of savages too. Who perhaps they thought once they shoot, they would scatter in all directions. But they were quite shocked to find that it wasn't the case.
The king of the Zulu nation did not want this war, but he was prepared for it. The Zulus had a proud military tradition. The king's army was taken seriously by those who'd seen it in action. White settlers had warned Chelmsford of Zulu prowess, their speed and endurance, their ability to fight in large numbers skillfully deployed. But Chelmsford's only African experiences had been in the Eastern Cape, where his enemy had used hit-and-run guerrilla tactics. He was convinced the Zulus would want to fight in the same way, and that he would have to force them out. Never thinking that the Zulus might want to face him, Chelmsford sent out a patrol to find them.
Here we actually see the Zulu army using tactics, which today, this very day, we use in battle. They put in a masking movement. Their scouts saw this puny little patrol approaching the vanguard of the Zulu army. Well, what did they do? They sent out scouts to act as bait and invited this patrol to fire a few fleeting shots at them before disappearing into the long grass.
Napoleon is reputed to have said that the general who makes the fewest mistakes wins the battle. The Zulu generals undoubtedly made the fewest mistakes. If one starts to tally those, the British, one finds a very considerable list.
At 1:30 that night, Chelmsford heard that his patrol had encountered the Zulus. He gave orders for half his force to prepare to leave the camp. At 4:30, Chelmsford led his men out to join up with the patrol. Chelmsford was leaving the camp at half strength and taking his forces in the wrong direction. The Zulu decoy had worked.
They had a picnic attitude towards the whole thing. And I think that is very dramatized by the fact that Sir Lord Chelmsford himself had breakfast that morning, I mean, with all the silver and things. That shows the disdain, really, that there is an element of disdain in their attitude.
The day of the battle began with Chelmsford miles away. Chelmsford left Lieutenant Colonel Henry Pulleine in command of the camp. Pulleine was essentially a military bureaucrat. He had never heard a shot fired in anger.
Henry Pulleine was in his tent, which was next to Chelmsford's tent. At this moment, a picket, a lookout, comes in from that ridge line on the skyline with rather a startling message. He salutes Pulleine and he says, "Colonel Pulleine, there are thousands of Zulus on the top of that plateau, and they're apparently advancing towards the left front of Isandhlwana camp." And Pulleine walked across to where the men were having their breakfast, and he ordered them to leave their breakfast, and they were told to form up in a skirmishing line to face the threat.
The soldiers grumbled at having to interrupt their breakfast. Neither they nor their officers seemed concerned.
One of the officers who survived wrote home afterwards, "Well, we had seen equally large bodies of men on the Cape frontier, and we were not alarmed in the least, for we never dreamed for a moment that the Zulus would come on and attack us."
They should have been worried, very worried. The main Zulu army, 25,000 strong, was camped just 4 miles away.
Once again, in absolute brilliant fashion, the Zulus managed to effect the ultimate in surprise. It was behind this plateau that the massed Zulu army lay hidden. And some sources reckon perhaps as many as a number of days before the Battle of Isandhlwana went down, the Zulu main army was already hidden there.
At 11:30, a British patrol headed up to the plateau. They were about to get the shock of their lives.
One feels one's hackles rise as these men say, "Dear God." Suddenly we had to rein in our horses to prevent our horses from falling into a huge valley. And they gazed aghast at what was in this valley, below and beyond them, stretching off along the course of that Ingwebini stream, off in an easterly direction, as far as the eye could see, packed in there, squatting in absolute silence upon their great war shields, regiment by discipline regiment, with the Zulus of the main Zulu army. What a moment that must have been.
When the British patrol saw the Zulu army, out of desperation or stupidity, the 30 men fired on the 25,000 Zulus. The Zulu response was immediate and chilling. Regiment by regiment, the whole army began to move. The patrol fled back towards the camp, with one flank of the Zulu army giving full chase. The news soon reached Henry Pulleine.
Pulleine's attitude in this moment was, "I have got 1,774 men. Of these men, 1,000 are veteran soldiers equipped with modern breech-loading lever-action Martini Henry rifles. These rifles can deliver 12 rounds per man per minute. They can fire accurately a 600-grain slug of lead accurately at ranges up to 800 yards. I put it to you that Pulane's attitude in this tent is roll on, Zulus, roll on, and we'll thump the blighters in the open.
The British soldiers began their well-rehearsed procedures, but the Zulus had more surprises in store. At 12:40, one of the men suddenly glanced away from the Zulu attack. The traditional Zulu tactic, known as the horns of the buffalo, was moving inexorably into position. The second flank of the Zulu army had appeared.
Impi yakwaZulu yayihamba ngokuthi kube izimpondo lezi bese balesi okusho ukuthi impi ibizwa ngokuthiwa ifuba sayo bese uba enye amabutho aphumatha zimpondo ke lezo.
Soon the horns of the buffalo and the chest were firmly established. The next stage, as the horns close, is called eating the enemy. Zulu tactics required them to charge right into the massed firepower of the British army. Their casualty rate was enormous, but still they kept coming. Another factor had come into play on the Zulu side: motivation.
Everybody knew that this was a foreign army coming into Zulu territory. This was somebody who had broken the doors down of the house and had invaded. That was realized by the men who fought this war and who had to run across this valley to get close enough to those guns to kill the people firing them. Call it a charge, if you will. Can you imagine charging that distance across this valley into rifle fire, rank volley firing? Very difficult thing to do. This was chasing the burglars out.
But then the Zulu advance faltered. The Martini Henry rifles were having the desired effect.
There's certainly a point fairly early in the battle when the British seemed to be winning. The men seemed to be in good spirits. They were laughing and joking and convinced they were giving the blacks an awful hammering. And there's very much a feeling, again, that this battle is going to go the way that the British want it to go.
The Zulus were pinned down, unable to move forward, hiding in the long grass. Then from the ridge, an old Zulu chief strode onto the battlefield in front of the crouched warriors and screamed at them to move forward. Your king never ordered you to lie down. He ordered you to fight.
Wayekhona umkhosana okwayibabamkhulu wawubaba. Okwathi mayisi isibambene lapha noma ngeke ngisho exactly ukuthi kwakuyiphi indawo lapha. Yathi mayisima laphana wayidonsa ukuthi ayingene ngaphakathi. Ikwenzela bebaqothe baqede phela. Lapho umkhosana efike wafela khona.
The Zulus moved forward. The horns closed. Faced with the full weight of the Zulu force, the British line broke. There are stories of men running out of ammunition, stories of guns jamming, stories of native contingents running away. But as the Zulus advanced, the British line broke. Chingwayo, the Zulu general, from a vantage point up on the ridge, watched his plan work. This was his finest hour.
This was an enormous battle. This battle had its moment when it might even have been a British victory. But all those things that make good soldiery came into play. Good tactics, good men, use of the ground, mobility, communication. And the British were short on many of those. And the Zulus were long on many of those. And the Zulus carried the day. I'm convinced that we have to appraise this battle accordingly. We have to stop looking at it as a British defeat and disaster. Overwhelming numbers of savages coming over the hills, darkening the azure skies with clouds of assegais. Go and read the poetry of this period. Forget it. These were brave, intelligent human beings under intelligent command, executing brilliantly issued commands brilliantly. And they carried it off.
in 2 hours. All over. Modern British Army. Finished.
The ordinary soldiers had no chance. They were outnumbered and outmaneuvered. In groups and alone, they fell. When reports of shooting being heard in the camp reached Lord Chelmsford, they were airily dismissed. "How amusing," said one of his officers. And then, in the final moments of the battle, the skies darkened. There was an eclipse. Several hours later, Chelmsford returned. He found mostly bodies to greet him. 1,300 of his men had been killed.
Most of the men who fought this battle were in fact trapped. Trapped by the idiocy and the arrogance of their officers, unable to go anywhere else, and were caught, isolated, without horses to get away like so many of the officers, and were slaughtered here. That's something that's forgotten. It's somehow this devoted band against this mountain. I think it's much more tragic than that.
Chelmsford's failure to recognize the ability of his enemy had cost his men dearly.
This is something that plagues the European armies for a very long time indeed, and it is a very great mistake, because what those people who think that way don't understand is it doesn't actually matter where you come from or what color you are. What actually matters is how well trained you are and how well led you are. That's all that matters.